This is Paper, Rock, Scissors. Nearly everyone's played it, and nearly anyone can, because it's fairly simple. One strategy directly counters another, but is itself directly countered by the third strategy, and for decades, the simple trichotomy that makes the basis of this game up has been hailed as the gold standard for competitive metas of all kinds. And some competitive metas are even more basic than that. For instance, in American football, it's basically run versus pass, but even in more dynamic metas, like for instance, the Pokemon meta, there may be a lot of different types of Pokemon, but you're still effectively playing paper, rock, scissors. But even in the most simple or tired of metas, things will change from time to time. For example, in American football, the play-action pass was eventually introduced to address and break that dichotomy, and in Pokemon, every now and again, new types of Pokemon are introduced. And those needed changes are exactly what we're here to talk about today. What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, Mtg, along with Igby, who you can't see, but I promise you is down here. Here he is. Here's that big old boy. Right there. Now, originally, this video was supposed to be about how a good, healthy meta is usually a paper, rock, scissors meta, but as I really got to thinking about it, I realized that's just not the truth anymore. Which brings us back to the original question. What even is a healthy standard meta, and how has that changed, and what can be done to address it? Again, a lot to talk about today. Let's get into it.
And I'm your favorite magic channel's favorite magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck techs. I come correct like a porn star, slicing up all these other suckers with my sword mark.
And we're back with a very special episode today, or at least I think it'll be. The more I think about this topic, the more kind of important I believe that it is, because for the last couple of years, Standard's been in a slump, and I think you'd be a fool not to admit that. I mean, we did have kind of a worldwide pandemic that shut down a lot of local game stores, and the ones that stayed open, F&M couldn't fire, and Paper Standard has been slow to repopulate. That's obvious. I want to go ahead and get the elephant out of the room before we start things here, but I also think that for those of us who have continued to play Standard, there are multiple other elephants that maybe we need to address. For one, there was obviously Throne of Eldraine. A lot of concentrated power on just a few cards in that set, and it had the effect of making the next 2 years of Standard pretty much all about the cards and mechanics in Throne of Eldraine, and we got very sick of that very quickly. Once that set rotated out, there was a lot of positive will towards Standard. I remember us all being fairly happy, but it didn't take very long after that rotation for Standard to settle down, stale, and we're all burned out on it again. So why did that happen? I could quickly list off all the reasons why it happened and then list off how we fix it and all that, but then the video wouldn't even be 10 minutes. It's hard to monetize something like that effectively, and it probably wouldn't be very interesting for you to watch. You don't want to see that video, so let's take it slow, everybody, and let's go through 5 ways that we can fix this mess. But first, not a word from our sponsor. I know it kind of sounded like I was gearing up for that, but no. I just want to shoo one more elephant out of the room before we really jump into things here. I think that an intelligent person could attempt to make the argument, maybe not successfully, but attempt to make the argument that Standard is fairly healthy right now. Despite how many content creators I see on YouTube, Twitter, and across all socials talk about how the sky is falling and Standard is dead, nobody plays Standard, get out of here while you still can, and all that stuff. I don't think that's true, because Standard is statistically, believe it or not, and you should, because it's not that hard of a statistic to believe, Standard is still the most played Magic the Gathering format across all Magic the Gathering formats. And it's not in the worst place right now. I know you might think it is, but, you know, usually the dichotomy or trichotomy is rock, paper, scissors. An aggro deck, a mid-range deck, and a control deck. The mid-range deck beats the aggro deck, the control deck beats the mid-range deck, the aggro deck beats the control deck, and you see how that's usually how it works. But right now in Standard, we have Mono Black Control, we have Boros Aggro, Boros Reanimator, Grixis Vampires. Some of these decks have just become popular in the last month or 2 months. Naya Runes is a thing, right? There's a bunch of decks I still haven't listed off, like Esper. There's tons of decks in Standard right now, and I know that you tend to just play against the same 4 on Arena over and over, but there are tons of viable decks in the current Standard. And yet, how I would counter that argument is to say, and yet, things still feel stale. And again, why is that? Well, I think the most obvious reason is that a lot of us are playing more Magic than we've ever played before because of Arena. Now, I've made this argument before, but I'll quickly rehash it here, and I mean quickly. Now, before, we were playing F&M. We were playing Magic the Gathering at our friend's house 2 days a week or something like that. If we go to F&M, it's 5 hours, right? Depending on how many games we lose and how quickly. It's 5 or 6 hours or so at F&M, and then you're more or less done for the week, you know. On average, I would imagine that even the most die-hard Magic players probably only played 12 hours of Magic or a little more during the course of a given week, right? But now you can easily play 6 hours of Magic in a day, every day, depending on who you are and how often you play the Arena client. But a lot of us will play at least 2 hours of Arena every single day. Now, of course, this is where I could be a cynic and tell you to touch grass, go outside, do all that stuff, but I'm not going to do that because I also sit and play Arena for at least 3 or 4 hours every single day, whether it's building decks or actually getting into the Arena. And that just means that those same decks you're going to see at F&M a few times a week, and people would change up their deck from week to week, from time to time. Now, you see the same decks over and over every single day for hours at a time, and that has affected things. So to kind of dip our toe into the water, I think there's some Arena changes that can be made real quickly that aren't necessarily going to affect the philosophy of how Wizards prints cards or anything nuts like that. Nothing too big here, just some simple changes I think you could make on Arena to make the user experience a little bit better, not only for Standard, but for all formats on the client. Now, in the past, I've done a whole video about ways you can fix Arena to make it a better thing, and I think there's plenty of stuff I could add to that. But I'm going to add a few things to it here. Just 3 quick things that I want to talk about that I think would be easy ways to fix the Standard experience on Arena and other experiences for that matter. Now, first of all, always play against a different deck. Now, I know this sounds really tough to do, but most of these are going to involve the matchmaker in some way. Now, the matchmaker can't completely be sure that you always play against a different deck, but it can make sure that you don't play against the identical Esper list that's in Standard twice, the identical Boros aggro list that's in Standard twice in a row. Now, it's fine with me if you play against Boros, and then you play against Esper, and then you play against Boros. But I never want to play against the same deck more than twice in a row, and that sure does happen a lot. And I think that you could easily fix that with the Matchmaker. The second quick suggestion here in the Arena Matchmaker is to alternate going first and drawing first. I can't tell you how many times on stream I have, or even off of stream, I have drawn first 5, 6, 7 times in a row, and that can get very disheartening. Now, I know this isn't just a Standard fix. I'm sneaking Arena fixes into the video, but this will make the Standard play experience a lot better too, because Standard, more than any other format on Arena, is incredibly dependent on going first. Now, don't get me wrong, going first is like the best thing you can do in any game of Magic in pretty much any format, but Standard has this sort of snowballing value quality to it right now, to where going first can be very, very important, even more so than it can be in other formats. And honestly, I don't think this one is too much to ask. I know you're already leaving a comment like, I can't do that. There's not enough users on the site to make sure that blah, blah, blah. Well, the Arena has been downloaded over 50 million times at this point, and apparently there are, at any given time, an average of over 1 million active users. These numbers may be inflated, but even if, again, there's only 10% of their numbers, and there's 100,000 active users on the client at any given time, you ought to be able to match up with someone who did the opposite thing of what you did last time, whether it's go first or draw first. One of the worst things about this client is just drawing first 6 times. You can't do anything about that. Going first is awesome. Going second sucks. So, you could probably fairly easily fix this, even if you just do it in unranked. And finally, speaking of unranked, de-incentivize mirrors in unranked. We know that unranked takes a couple of things into account when it matches you up with somebody, right? The number of rares and mythics in your deck versus the number of commons and uncommons and all of that. But it will also often try to match you up with decks that have similar cards in them, and this is an admitted thing. And I have absolutely no idea why Arena decides to make you miserable by doing this. Sometimes you'll decide to build a deck with a off-the-wall, off-the-beaten-path kind of card that nobody plays with, and in your first 3 games, you will play against that card in unranked while you're trying to test the deck out, and it just doesn't make any sense, the logic behind this decision. Please de-incentivize mirrors in matchmaking. It makes absolutely no sense. So all that will not only make Standard better on Arena, I think it'll just make Arena better. So let's get into, you can kind of call that an honorable mention, right? Let's get into the stuff that Wizards can do in Standard, specifically to make things better. Now, one thing that I think is easy is just more cards. And this is something Wizards might want to do, because then you get to print more cards and make more money. How's that sound? Overlord's probably pretty good to you, right? So I don't think that this is such a bad idea. But printing more cards does not necessarily mean print more cards. Let's go into what all it could mean. Now, one way is by literally printing more cards. I want to go ahead and get that out of the way. We'll discuss ways they could effectively do this without actually doing it, but yeah, they could just print more cards. I've already talked about this in a fairly recent video, how Wizards could theoretically release a small-ish set, say 100 or 120 cards, it doesn't even have to be that many, during the summer when there's a very long break between standard sets, right? We usually get one that comes out in, say, May, like we did this year, and then we get another one that comes out in September. So in July, they could release, say, an 80 to 120 card set. And you get a whole print run of those, but maybe it's not as much of a print run as you do for like a 300 plus card set, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can finagle this, and you'd have to figure out the right way to do it. But I actually don't think it's a terrible idea to print an extra small set, say a 8.5 set standard, right? To kind of liven things up in that big break between standard sets during the summer. But if that's a little too much for you, there are some ways in your design philosophy that you can effectively juice more cards out of a set, right? You're not necessarily printing more cards, but if we get to play with more of those cards, you've effectively given us more cards. So if you make the commons and uncommons more playable than they are right now, then again, effectively you've given us more cards to play with, and thus you don't have so much concentrated power at the top where the best cards are the best cards and there's no reason not to play those. Again, if you give us more playable stuff at the lower rarities, that'll fix all kinds of budget problems for budget-minded players, and I do think you want to fix those problems, Wizards. I know you don't seem to care, but you need to fix those problems. So if you give us more playable commons and uncommons, standard playable commons and uncommons, then that effectively gives us more cards to play with. And another way to address this is to give us cards that have a lot of synergy between multiple different decks, right? I think a good example is a card like Voice of the Blessed, right? This is a card that goes in at least 3 different decks. It goes in Life Gain, obviously. It goes in Clerics, and it goes in Spirits for what that's worth. So it does all that without being too broken, which I think is kind of good. Another decent example, by the way, that I think ties together all the stuff I've been talking about is Big Score and its little brother or sister, Unexpected Windfall, right? Big Score is a card that is playable in multiple different kinds of decks. It's seeing play in multiple decks right now. It's an uncommon, so it's not going to break the bank. There's a lot of synergy on this card without it being overly synergistic, right? It's just a good card that so happens to bring synergy to multiple decks like Arcane Bombardment or Is It. So there's some really cool stuff about cards like Big Score, Voice of the Blessed. I want stuff that's more like those cards. Cards that aren't too pushed, but can still go into multiple decks. And as much as I say Wizards doesn't seem to care about standard or budget-minded players, they have been doing some things to address that recently. We have been seeing more cards that have synergy in more than one deck, with more than one tribe, with more than one concept. We have been seeing more playable commons and uncommons. So these are things that I think they've been working on and they need to continue working on. All of that, again, makes it so that power isn't so concentrated at the top. More cards to play with actually means that in a lot of ways, there's less power in the format. Oh, and one last thing before I leave this particular bullet point, I am not saying that all cards should be powerful, because if all cards are powerful, then no cards are powerful. We tried that with Throne of Eldraine. It was a design philosophy that I personally thought worked for a long time until I saw it in action in Standard with Throne of Eldraine, and I've changed my tune a good bit. I'm not saying that a rising tide lifts all boats and that all cards should be powerful so that none are. Instead, I'm saying that we bring the commons and uncommons up to a level where they're more playable, and we bring the rares and mythics down to a level where they're not so broken. All right, for my third point, we're going to start getting into more and more controversial territory here, but for point number 3, let's just say, don't be afraid to ban or suspend or even restrict cards. Whatever happened to restricting cards? This is a take that I see on Twitter and Reddit every now and again. Why don't we restrict cards in Standard anymore? And I actually think that's a very, very good question. I think that Wizards thinks it's a little messy to restrict cards in Standard and even other formats, but I don't see why. I mean, a one-of is kind of perfect for some cards that aren't at an incredibly high power level, but are nonetheless cards that we get sick of seeing. And for what it's worth, suspension could work with these same cards, cards like, for instance, the Meat Hook Massacre or Goldspan Dragon. Like, these are cards that I don't think are over the line by any stretch. I don't think you should ban Goldspan. I don't think you should ban the Meat Hook Massacre, but a suspension for a month or two until a new set comes out or something like that, I think it's actually a really cool idea. I don't see why you can't just suspend cards in Standard. We see it a lot in Historic. I wish we saw more of that in Standard, or even just restriction. Restricting down to 1 gold span or 1 meat hook or something. I also don't really see the problem with that. I don't think these cards deserve to be banned, but I do think that some restrictions need to be made on those cards, which is why we have that concept. And even when it comes to outright bans, don't be afraid to pull the trigger on that when your player base is telling you, I'm sick of this card, which they told you with multiple cards over this last Standard, and you just let it sit. And now we're in a bit of a mess, but you just want to make it to rotation, don't you? Wizards of the Coast wants to make it to rotation. You want to make it to rotation so you can have fun playing Standard again. And honestly, if they had done the things they needed to do to cultivate this format before then, you would still be having fun playing Standard. You'd have been having fun playing Standard a month ago. But no, instead they sit on their hands. I think they're worried that people won't like bans or people won't like suspensions or restrictions or whatever, but for the most part, I think that a lot of people are very happy when bans happen and when suspensions happen with the knowledge that the Meat Hook Massacre is going to get unsuspended once a new set comes out or something. Or a restriction happens. I think that a lot of people would be even happier about those things than an outright banning, and I see plenty of people happy about bans. And yeah, I know, if you paid $50 for a Meat Hook Massacre, I don't know why you did that. It's a really good card, but why is it still $50? Still, I know that if they banned it, it would go down to like $5 and you would lose a huge part of your investment. That would feel very bad. And Wizards, when it comes to Arena, does not want to refund the wild cards. So there's incentive both ways to not ban stuff. But again, I see the majority of the player base nowadays being very happy when Wizards announces bans. So I don't know why they're still so shy to do it. Now for the penultimate suggestion on how to fix Standard, I've got what I believe is a no-brainer, kind of a coffee break. We'll take a little sip of water in between controversial arguments like ban stuff and the last one. But this one, I don't think will be too controversial to the player base, but I think Wizards of the Coast would push back against it a good bit. Now, this is actually 2 points. This bullet point, it's A, more support for competitive Standard play, and to be very blunt and tell you exactly what I mean, the second point, better rewards. Now, from Wizards' point of view, they would probably tell you that they tried this already, but my counter would be that you actually didn't. You didn't try very hard at all, in fact. Now, you might remember a couple of years ago when Wizards paid a bunch of pro Magic players, basically a salary to stay home and Twitch stream as part of a competitive league of sorts, right? Magic also threw a bunch of money at paper Standard events a few years ago. Remember that Pro Tour where we had like wrestling entrances and pyrotechnics and stuff, and it was just not a very viewed Standard event, but that was very likely because the Standard they held the event in wasn't good, not because you spent too much money on the event. Also, those streamers didn't fail because you paid them too much money. Those streamers failed because you didn't give them enough support. And in a lot of cases, those streamers didn't even fail. We're talking about some of the most popular Magic the Gathering streamers on Twitch. You're trying to tell me they failed. I lost my pen. I'm just so upset that they actually put they didn't directly do it, but they effectively put some of the blame on the players. Like, oh, it just didn't work out because, doesn't bring in enough money. Whose fault is that? Wink, players think, no, it's not. No, Wizards, you got to try harder. You've got to try harder. It is really lame to see not just other games in general, other esports in general, right, pull off these huge events with 50... That Paper, Rock, Scissors championship clip that I played at the beginning of the video, did you see how many people attended that event and are going freaking crazy?
On behalf of Bud Light, I'd like to award you $50,000 check.
I have said before that usually a Magic the Gathering tournament is a lot like a chess tournament or a Scrabble tournament where everyone's really, really quiet. I think that Magic tournaments need to be more like Super Smash Brothers tournaments, where everyone is lit, everyone's up, everyone's ready to see something nuts, And I actually don't think that's as hard to pull off as Wizards of the Coast seems to think that it is. So reward players more for Standard play, put more oomph, more money, there it is. I mean, you make money hand over fist, Wizards. Put more money into the idea of getting this out there as an esport. I know that you think you've already tried, but you didn't try at all. Like, let me cast an event. I won't fix everything by itself, but it'll be fun for me, if anything. Happy Feet. Wombo combo. All right, last thing here is probably the most controversial. So probably. It's the most controversial. And Wizards would tell you that they tried this already too, but I think we're in a different world than we were in when we tried this the first time. Number 5, the panic button, break glass in case of emergency, faster rotations. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of the video and dredge up that argument about how we all play so much Magic now. I mean, I would be willing to venture that a lot of the people who are watching this video right now, either, it's one or the other, coin flip, either play more Magic than they did 2 years ago or play no Magic. But those of you who are still playing, I almost can guarantee you that you play more Magic than you did when Magic was paper only, because you play on the Arena client. It's very likely. I mean, again, it's not every single one of you, and I'm sure I'll get comments. I don't do it. I play Magic, but I don't play Arena. I don't play Moto, MTG Online, or I do play MTGO, but I don't play Arena. I'll get those comments. But the vast majority of Magic players play Arena and do it a lot. So this is another one. Again, I think Wizards has A, already tried, and B, probably wants to make money off of. When they first decided that rotations would happen every 6 months rather than every year, there was a massive outcry. And a lot of that outcry was, you just want to take more of our money. You know, my cards aren't going to be relevant for as long. You know, I already had to worry that I would buy a card and then 2 years later it was going to be completely worthless, right? So now it's I buy a card and a year later it's completely worthless. So I understand and sympathize with all of those arguments. I really do. But I would think it would be interesting. Let me just put it that way. I think it would be an interesting thought experiment if Wizards decided that just for 1 year, let's say, we are going to make rotation every 6 months or even every 8 or 9 months. It doesn't have to be a round number. They tried 12 months. We're on 12 months again. It was 12 months forever. Then they tried 6 months. Those are both round numbers, right? But it's because they think you're stupid. I'm really ascribing a lot of bad faith to Wizards, and I don't really mean to, but it's not that Wizards thinks you're stupid. It's just that like 8 or 9 months would be a little difficult to keep straight for some people. But my point is that it doesn't have to be 6 months or a year. It doesn't have to be, right? One way or the other, though, I think that we are in sort of a place on the Magic Jeremy Bearimy sort of timeline right now that we could shorten up rotation a little bit, and it wouldn't make quite as many people angry as it did the first time. But again, I just want to stress, this is a very much an extreme measure that I don't expect or even in some cases want them to make. It's just, again, a break glass only in case of emergency kind of thing. If Standard really is scaling that quickly, then this might be the last resort. But that's all I got for this one. I actually think I could stretch this one out to like an hour-long video about like what exactly is the philosophy here. But that would really get esoteric, and I don't want to do too much of that. I tried to keep it simple. That's what they got to kiss the track. You got to keep it simple, stupid. I tried to do that in this video, but there's a lot left unsaid. So go down there in the comments section. Let me know how you feel about it. What can be done to improve Standard I didn't talk about here. Like, for example, they could just do it better. It's like Hank Hill said, let's try that again, but maybe just a little better this time. And honestly, it all comes down to that. As simple and dumb as it sounds, you just have to do better. But like I said, that's it for this one. Just make sure to check out some other videos here on the channel. I give money for that, and also personal fulfillment when I see the people who've watched the videos. And I guess you get something out of it too. They're fairly entertaining, people tell me. So like, watch some other videos. There should be some over here if Editing Dev remembers to put thumbnails from videos on the side of the screen. But aside from that, just do the YouTube stuff. Like, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. We're trying to get to 1 million subs. We're at 126K. We actually just hit 126K like last week. So thanks for that, guys. We've been trying to get there forever. We've been stuck at 125 since time out of mind. So just really want to say I appreciate you for that. But now the march to 1 million begins. Help me out with that if you haven't done it yet. And also check out the Patreon, where you can vote on content. That's why I'm doing this video. The patrons really wanted to see this one. And you can also see outtakes from various videos from time to time, a couple of times a month. It's a fun thing to do. I think it's worth $1 for extra content. But aside from that, you can check out the Twitch streams. Now, tomorrow or Thursday, very likely going to be Thursday night, we'll be streaming 8 to very likely 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's going to be our 2-year stream anniversary. It's just nuts to me that we've been streaming for 2 years already. I should be better at streaming on Twitch after 2 years, but I'm not. Either way, come see me fumble my way through the 2-year birthday of the streams on Thursday night, 8 to 11 EST. But aside from that, I guess I actually am finally done with all the self-promotion that I'm so bad at and I hate doing. So I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.